Welcome to Refuge Radio. Refuge Radio is a podcast about the National Wildlife Refuge Association and the nation's National Wildlife Refuge System, spanning more than 850 million acres of land and water and part of a growing network of 568 refuges, at least one in every state. Today, we're speaking with Steve Jester. Steve is the Executive Director for Partners for Conservation. Prior to joining PFC, Steve was the Executive Director of the Guadalupe-Blanco River Trust. Steve was on the staff of the Nature Conservancy for almost a decade, leading community-based conservation projects, first in Texas and later in Wyoming. And before joining the Nature Conservancy, he spent a decade working with state fish and wildlife agencies in Florida and Texas. Steve is a sixth-generation Texan. That probably takes you back to Houston, doesn't it?
Yes.
And he's worked with private landowners throughout his career and has come to appreciate their critical importance in conserving working landscapes that provide for both people and nature in the United States. Steve, welcome to Refuge Radio.
Oh, thank you, KB. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, we're living in strange times. I hope you and your family are doing well.
We are.
And this is our first webcast or Zoom for Refuge Radio. Normally this has just been a podcast. So now this will go out over our podcasting channels and will go up as a video as well. So you're likely to have more views and listens than anyone that we've had on the show before. So I'm excited to have you here.
No pressure.
Yeah. So I don't know, Steve, tell us what you do.
Well, my organization was established by a group of landowners that learn through experience the value of relationships in sustaining both the ecology of the places where they live and work, but also the economy and the community, human and natural, in where they work. And specifically, the partnership that really got my position going, or my organization going, was a relationship between a rancher in western Montana and a biologist with Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which is a part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's refuge system. And their relationship, along with their relationship with others in their community, spawned the desire to sort of share what they had learned in western Montana, to see if they could provide a inspiration, information, not, I wouldn't say a blueprint, but at least an approach that people of different perspectives that share values about a place can work together to provide a better future for all three of the things that I mentioned. So that's where we got started, and what we do is try to make that easier for folks to do around the country.
Yeah, it sounds like if you've met one landowner, you've met one landowner, because there's no cookie cutter there, but
Yep.
The template is good.
Yes.
I went to school at the University of Montana, so Western Montana is a place that's near and dear to my heart. And, I can imagine, knowing some of the landowners that I know there, that building trust is a challenge. How'd you go about doing that?
Well, that trust is probably the word or the concept that we talk the most about. And what we find is what is usually the biggest impediment to building trust is having that first honest, open conversation among the different perspectives, and trying to focus upon what they value in a place. And what we find is when folks do have that conversation, where we're not approaching every encounter as a zero-sum game, somebody wins and somebody loses, that multiple perspectives that share concern about a place, once they have that conversation, we'll discover that they have about 80% in common. Yeah. And that's where the message we try to bring is, that's where you need to start. It's having that conversation, learning what you have in common, and then building outward from there, both first a relationship, then a partnership, and then finally working together to achieve those things that look like success for your place.
Do you think there's an opportunity in these strange times? I mean, we're many of us are stuck at home and inevitably have a little more free time. You think there's a space to sort of explore opportunities? You think people are doing some navel gazing and thinking about this, thinking about their values, if you will?
Well, I do know from talking. So I'm led by a board of landowners that are still on, for the most part, on and of the land. So I think just from visiting with my board, while there's a lot of concern about the uncertainty and of there was a great deal of uncertainty for rural America before this latest crisis. But I think talking to people that amongst the uncertainty, they do reflect on the value of the relationships and the ability to work with others to get the work done that they need. So I think the folks that are used to working with partners are suffering a little stress right now because we are isolated almost coast to coast, I guess now. But I do think that probably those that maybe are not as thoroughly engaged are thinking about how much their success is dependent upon the activities of others. And that's, the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Service, the first three words are working with others.
Yep.
And I think that's, that's could just as well be the first three words of our mission statement, because it is about working together, and these times do make that a little bit challenging.
Well, let's riff on that for a second. Tell us a little bit about how you do it. What's the strategy that you and your organization are pursuing to meet your mission and reach your goals?
You bet. So what we have learned and what I've lived, I guess, is the fact that most of the individuals and organizations that are engaged in conservation of natural resources are very technically proficient and technically focused on the work, whether it's the habitat restoration, the species restoration, the nuts and bolts of getting things done. And many landowners are the same way. That's where they sort of start when they are first engaged in the land management occupation, agricultural occupation. But what both perspectives soon learn is that really there's so many things that overlap into different perspectives. Whether as a landowner, it's working with your county commissioners, your neighbors, other people in your landscape as a part of your operations, or as an agency or organization employee who is very technically proficient, but then soon discovers when they get out there on the land that many of the things, if not most of the things that they do, require partnering with others, maybe of the same perspective or of a different perspective. And we're really not training our workforce for that. That's something that you either come by naturally, or you find a good mentor, no matter what your perspective, that sort of shows you the ropes of how do I talk to a different perspective.
Right.
And so I think the communication between the different perspectives is what we focus on, because that seems to be sort of the limiting factor in many situations. I tell people all the time that you can't money whip or science whip relationships. You can have all the money in the world, the best plans, but you still have to have the ability to work with others to get stuff done. And I think nearly everybody that's gone very far in any industry learns that pretty quickly, and it's especially true of this particular occupation. So we work on through convenings, through trainings, through meetings, trying to build up the level of proficiency and comfort, really, of what are essentially a largely introverted group of both landowners and agency personnel to learn how to embrace people as a part of their job. And that's it only took me half a career to learn the importance of that, and it's taken me the second half of the career to make up my deficiency in skills to be able to do that. So after 30 years, I feel adequately prepared. So we hope that we could flatten that curve a little bit for people in the industry.
Yeah, we had a conversation about that when we were together at the National Wildlife Refuge Association's staff and board gathering just in February, I think. And one of the things you and I talked about is the importance of technical people being able to just have a real conversation, to sit around a campfire or around a kitchen table or at a coffee shop in a small town and talk real with somebody and create a relationship that isn't just about the end goal, but about having a real relationship, caring,
You bet.
That matters. And it's something that, I think can actually be taught and should be taught. You learn all these technical skills in the advancement of your degree or in any professional pursuit, even those that don't take place in institutions of higher learning, that take place on the street or in the field or on the ranch. And sometimes you can get buried in that and not think about how to connect with somebody who's on the other side of the fence. Yes. It ought to be a prerequisite to graduation to have to go sit around a campfire with people you don't know and may not agree with and see who comes out alive,
Well, and I think there's it's not rocket science by any means. I think most of us probably learned most of the skills that are necessary when we first left home, and when we were real small, to go to kindergarten and had to start building relationships and friendships that in some cases would last a lifetime for some of us. And every time you go to a new school, or even if it's in the same town, if you're in a bigger town, your classmates change. So, we are indoctrinated from an early age on how to do this. I think you're all when you're a 5-year-old in kindergarten, you basically a lot of your perspective is similar with your classmates, but the tools of starting a conversation, building a relationship over time, and getting to the point where you trust somebody enough to bring them into the things that are important to you and open yourselves up. It's basically the same, but we really sort of train, or the further you go along in your life, those skills are, in this profession anyway, are minimized and sort of thrown in a bucket that people call soft skills or interpersonal skills. It's a grab bag for everything from how to show up looking presentable to be able to talk to somebody without causing an argument to break out immediately. So I think in a lot of cases what we find is that it's a lot of fear and misconception on both sides of these different perspectives, assumptions about what somebody else wants, what somebody else wants to do, and really it's an exercise in risk taking, both professionally, personally, and emotionally, when you open yourself up to that type of a process with somebody that you don't know. So I do wish that we talked more about it through our academic training and through our early parts of our career, to let people know it's okay to ask questions and to be not as proficient in that skill set, because like you, I believe that they can be learned, and I'm living proof. I tell people all the time wherever I go that I got into this business because I didn't like people much. I didn't like being around people. It's not, I like individual people, but the idea of being around a whole lot of people that I don't know was very intimidating. And I have I have overcome that. And if I can do it, I think that anybody can.
Well, you know how you can tell an extroverted Texan? He looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. So
yeah, there you go. There you go.
It's I think there's a connection to what we're talking about right now, to what's happening right now as well. In the time of social distancing, we don't have to be socially distant, and everybody ought to just take a minute and call somebody they haven't talked to in 20 years and just connect, or don't be afraid to call somebody you don't know but you've wanted to chat with. So that's my soapbox message for today. All right, Steve, you mentioned Western Montana as the genesis or the origin story of your organization and your work. Where does the work take place today?
So we initially got our start in the Western Montana, and built out from the west, and just a little bit of a sort of conservation relationship dynamic primer for folks that are not as deeply engaged. We in our country, we've got if you draw a line down the 100th meridian of our country, to the east of that, the Great Plains East, it's largely a private landscape. To the west of that line, it's more of a public lands landscape, and that's not just the National Wildlife Refuge System. That's the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service. Individual states have a lot more state land, school trust land in the western part of the country. So the people, the men and women of the West, no matter where they work, if they're concerned about landscapes, you already have relationships with different perspectives, however functional or dysfunctional they may be, just because of your landscape is so multi-dimensional, and people have to interact at least. So we built out in the West, and found a lot of places that were using this approach, and sort of brought them into the fold. And then as we started looking east, we discovered that that while the land ownership patterns were different, landowners are largely the same in the fact about in the area of what they're concerned about, the different areas of concern, the different areas of opportunity. So as we've hosted an annual gathering since 2008 called Private Lands Partners Day, that brings together landowners and non-landowners from all over the country that are working in partnership to achieve common goals. And what we found was that the tree farmer from South Georgia in a private lands landscape, and the cattle rancher from Northwest Utah in a largely public lands landscape, even though they were working with different ecosystems, different types of agricultural production, different types of communities, when they started having a conversation, they found that they had a lot in common of things that were challenging to them personally, and from a business standpoint as being a steward of the land. So we've slowly been growing to the east, finding people that are interested in learning how to work better across perspectives, finding, quite frankly, people that are doing it just like it's been done in the West.
Sure.
Just a lot. The partners are different. The landscapes are different, but the relationships are the same. And the relationships is what we focus on. So
I was going to ask about the partnerships. I would imagine, in the West, you've got different federal agencies or state agencies, obviously, that you're working with. Have you found that some of the work that you do with one partner, say the National Wildlife Refuge System, then translates as a best practice for when you're working with the Forest Service or BLM or whoever the agency may be? And can you share those in almost like a toolkit for both agencies and landowners going forward?
Yeah. So what we found is that there is a lot of overlap, and the way we try to do most of our gatherings and convenings and our trainings it's a little bit different than many entities, is we we don't try to do a session just for the Fish and Wildlife Service or just for the Forest Service. We try to have multiple perspectives in at the same time, because
Sure.
what we found is that just the act of coming together and sitting around the table and having those discussions starts to get the work done while they're learning to how to do the work, if that makes sense. So there is every agency, whether it's a state agency or federal agency, or, and quite frankly, every landscape has its own culture, its own what we like to call social capital, which is the ability, the innate ability of the personalities that are there today to come together around common goals. But the process, you may start at a different spot on the continuum as a group of diverse perspectives that are coming together, but the process, the approach is largely the same, at least in the coming together. And you'll run into, once you get further down the line and start talking about how we're going to get work done, then really the agency sort of authorities and all the nuts and bolts of getting things done becomes really a one-off, depending on where you are.
That's tactics versus strategy, right? The strategic tools are the same: trust, stewardship, open-mindedness. I mean, that's where it all is born out of. And then as you navigate each process, you have to get tactical.
Yeah. And we're not as good on that. We just concentrate on the strategies, because the tactics are so, we could not be a national organization and try to work at the tactical level, because once you get to implementation, it's too different.
Yeah. All right. So that's actually a perfect segue for my next question. Why do you do it? What does the world look like when you're successful? And where does it take us?
Well, I think the why is that the reason that these individuals started the organization, and the individuals board directors that we bring into the fold, what they have discovered is that this way of approaching the work that they do in their lives, quite frankly, is so powerful, so not just what it can do on the ground, but what it can do in your heart and do in your communities, that they are adamant that we need to be talking about it and sharing it with other folks that don't think that are only know the confrontational side of conservation and not the collaborative side of conservation. Several of them, I think every one of them has their own origin story of how they got to that place. Very few of them took that viewpoint from the beginning. So it's sort of sharing that idea of things can be different, and things can be inspiring, and things can be successful if you just give it a chance. I think that's why they are here, and I think that's why I'm here as well. I spent 30 years in this line of work, and would say that probably at least a third of those years were spent banging my head up against the wall, trying to figure out how to make things work that people wanted to be a part of. And this group of men and women have it figured out. So that's why they do what they do, and why I do what I do.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I think you're talking about unexpected allies. And, interestingly enough, sometimes I think we have some unexpected challengers as well. I heard you use a term when we were together in DC, white ciders. And, when I was thinking about your work, I was researching, reading through your website, watching your great videos, asking myself, how does this connect to wildlife refuges? Now, the National Wildlife Refuge Association, part of our mission is, protecting the landscapes that go beyond the boundaries of the National Wildlife Refuge System. And we believe that's utterly important because, the wildlife can see the best habitats. That's how they know to go to the refuges. But they also don't adhere to the boundary sign. So could you talk a little bit about what a white cider is and how your work connects to refuges?
Sure. Well, to me, the concept of the white side of a sign is if you've got an outward facing sign that either if you're a private landowner, it may say no trespassing. If you're National Wildlife Refuge manager or employee, it's got a blue goose on the other side. If you're state fish and game, it may have your state shield saying wildlife management area on the outward looking part of the sign. But what I've seen, it's not unique to government, to private landowners, or to nonprofit organizations that own land, because I've experienced it in all places. Even in the Nature Conservancy, we used to call them feral land stewards. That they, as long as everything was going on, was great going on behind on the white side of that sign, the world was muy pacifico, and there are individual landowners that's where they are right now. There are people that work for state and federal agencies that own land that's sort of where they see the end of their mission is at the white side of the sign. But in reality, whether you're an agricultural producer, Fish and Wildlife Service refuge manager, a state fish and game employee, the things that you care about are dependent upon, in some cases, more dependent upon what goes on the other side of that sign as what goes on behind the sign on the white side. So I think that's something that I spent time as a public lands manager early in my career, and I learned pretty quickly that a lot of the management activities that we did, the species that we were trying to benefit, very dependent upon that larger footprint beyond what I had to do. So it's not it's just a different perspective. I think most people over time come to appreciate the fact that the other side of that sign is just as important as you may not have the same responsibilities on the other side of that sign, but what happens on the other side of that sign is important to you. Yes. Yeah. And I think the National Wildlife Refuge System, the Fish and Wildlife Service, has recognized this for a long time. Many of the refuge units have conservation easements as a part of the refuge footprint, where the service does not own the land. It owns a set of rights on that land to keep it doing what it's doing for the landscape. And then we've got, you take the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, the whooping cranes overwintering ground down here in Texas. For many years, the whoopers stayed on the white side of the fence, but now the last 10 or 15 years, they're making more use of that area outside the refuge boundaries. And it's not, those folks down there are working hard to engage those communities that are as important to those cranes as the refuge is, or becoming as important to those cranes.
It would be hard not to understand interconnectedness and be invested in migratory birds,
Absolutely. You bet. Well, and even many of our birds don't even, that the Fish and Wildlife Service is the primary management authority of. They don't even, they're multinational or continental in nature. So it really, we are all connected, and it's bigger than any one place or any one person. And I think that's, once you embrace that and try to use that as a positive rather than a negative, then you come to a new place.
Yeah. So what's on the horizon? What do you got coming down the pike? Will Private Lands Partners Day be a virtual event this year? Will it happen in real, face to face? What's it look like?
Well, this year we are scheduled to be the week of our event is usually a week either side of the first week in October, and this year it's scheduled for October 5th through the 7th near Redmond, Oregon. So we are hopeful that by the time we get to the height of summer, that things have changed and we can start moving ahead with final arrangements for that meeting and have it as we've always had it since 2008. But that's largely out of our hands, and we'll be waiting on that. We are not. We continue our work as best we can on outreach and communication. I think most of my board directors would always prefer sitting at the kitchen table, sitting across at the coffee shop,
yep,
having these conversations. It's just you lose so much doing over the phone or doing it remotely when you're trying to build that trust that it makes it difficult to start new things. So we are also simultaneously working on a rebranding effort. This was already scheduled for us this year. I guess we've got a little bit more time to work on it, pay more attention to it now. We had an organization that's got a name very similar to ours that has a mission that's not widely accepted as a good thing in the conservation community, and there's been a lot of confusion between our organizations as far as who's doing what and who's who. So we are beginning a process of changing to a new name. It'll be announced later this summer, but with the same spirit and soul, ideally. So we're getting to spend a lot of time doing a forced rebranding, so to speak. It's not real comfortable for us, but we feel like it's probably in the best interests of our organization long term.
I've been a part of several rebranding efforts. They're always hard, and but there's great opportunity within them. So I wish you the best of luck about that.
Thank you.
I mentioned I went to school at the University of Montana, and when I sort of get a longing for the Western landscape, one of my favorite places to go is actually to your YouTube channel. You guys have got great videos and great content. How can listeners and watchers of this show find out more about what you're doing and what's coming down the road at you?
You bet. Well, we do have a thank you for the compliments on the YouTube channel. We've been very blessed to make a connection, have a relationship with a videographer in Western Montana that really gets the story that we're trying to tell. So his great images and our great, I'm biased, I guess, our great stories do make for some pretty compelling content that tell a story of what we are and what we do probably a lot better than I can here during the podcast. So I'd encourage viewers to go check us out on our YouTube channel. If you just search Partners for Conservation, all of our videos are up there, and that gives you a pretty good feel about who we are. We've got a website, www.partnersforconservation.org. We've got an active Facebook presence at Partners for Conservation, and we also do a monthly newsletter that's open to anyone who's interested in learning more about what we do and about public-private partnership and collaborative-based conservation in general. We feature a lot of stories, not just of what we're doing, but what others are doing, the great work that's going on all around the country, different perspectives coming together, building trust and getting things done. And you can sign up for that newsletter on the website.
Excellent. Well, Steve, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me and everyone who watches and listens to this. I look forward to checking back in with you and hearing how the planning for Private Lands Partners Day is coming along and how your rebranding effort is coming along. Will you check back in with us later this year?
Absolutely, KB. And I wish you and everybody that watches this to stay safe and stay well in the months and weeks ahead.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, KB.